let's face it, almost no business can scale up without using software nowadays. But often, digitalization in a company means only using Excel and sending internal emails between employees. In such an environment, it's quite difficult to introduce new off-the-shelf tools, and actually trying to do that may lead to chaos. Why? Because seasoned employees may resist giving up their tried and true methods. As a result, companies waste a lot of effort on manual, repetitive tasks, searching for information everywhere and hopping between different tools that actually don't do it all. This situation screams for a custom solution for business process automation. And this is the topic that I would like to explore today. Welcome to TechNouts, podcast by Inwedo, where we journey through the business galaxies.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here.
It's great to have you here, Agata. Agata Solnica, Chief Partnership Officer and entrepreneur and a hobbyist dancer.
Yes, all true.
Great to have you here. It's actually our first episode in the new studio. So if somebody is watching us on YouTube, you can kind of see how the setup looks like. If you're just listening, then I hope that the sound quality is still the same because the studio is a little bit different. But yeah, let's dive into the topic. I think we have quite an important thing to focus on: business process automation. It seems like a very broad topic and something that involves a lot of things connected to it. You as a board member at Inwedo and also Chief Partnership Officer, you have this overview of different projects, of what kind of clients we collaborate with. So I have a question for you. What kind of challenges or problems do you see most often that happen at businesses and that can be solved with software?
Okay, so maybe I'll start with a small disclaimer to begin with, because since we do work in the IT industry and we work with software, I think that there is this strong inclination to always look for solutions in software. And, it's good in some way because we work in this industry. This is what we specialize in. So also being in this bubble, I think we see a lot of aspects and a lot of challenges that can be solved with software. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think that modern technology allows to address very different issues and allow to optimize certain processes and make people works easier.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wanted to start with this little disclaimer to begin with. But for the purpose of this episode, I definitely will focus on software. And then working in Inwedo for over 8 years now, I think I've seen a wide array of various business challenges that our customers came to us for advice, and then ultimately some of those challenges turned into software projects. And I would say that most often we deal with moving offline processes to online, and maybe this was a challenge that was more common a few years back than nowadays. Then, of course, we deal with integrating different solutions and multiple sources of data into one tool to allow clear overview of the company information. Quite often we deal with moving various processes from Excel or different tools into a dedicated online platform. Sometimes the challenges that we see rely or revolve around project management and, again, integrating information from different departments of the company into one tool that will just give the company or the strategic team members overview of what's going on within the company. So challenges are different. There are also some smaller aspects around each of the processes within the company. So we also have experience in addressing processes like recruitment or employee onboarding, document workflow management. So there's different aspects that address various departments of companies or their processes.
Cool. I think that's a very broad answer. But what I take from it is that software can solve some problems, right? And it can be done in various ways. And I want to consider right now a scenario of a company that is growing and wants to solve their problems with software. So let's say there is like just a regular company providing some kind of consulting services, and they grow from a couple of people to 25 and then up to 50 and then maybe even reach the number of 100 employees. And along the way, their processes change, the volume of work they do changes, it grows. So they start subscribing to different tools because they need something to manage the workflow. They need something to, the HR processes, the payroll, maybe also something to communicate. And there are various tools that they start to subscribe, and there are different departments that use different tools, and it just grows and grows. And in this kind of scenario, does using a lot of tools pose any kind of problems? Is something that you could kind of point and tell us what can happen in such scenario?
I think it definitely can lead to some challenges, and I've seen situations where using different tools at the same time within one company has led to some challenges. And just, also to begin with, I love Excel as a tool.
Yeah.
And I use it all the time, not also for work purposes. I quite often use it in my private life to plan trips, create shopping lists, and there's just a wide array of things that you can do with Excel. I think it's a tool that a lot of people are familiar with because we are trained and taught to use it from early years at school. Yeah. I think it's also, widespread and it's easily accessible. So it's usually the first resort whenever you need some tried and tested work tool to create some process or calculate something or just keep track of various aspects of your work. You would go to Excel.
Yeah.
And that's, the perfectly good thing. And even right now, whenever I have some task to do, sometimes I would do it in Excel first and then think of, okay, how can I transfer it to another tool? At the same time, and also what I've seen in my experience is that at some scale and at some point when companies use Excel for their processes, which when company is growing and when the company reaches a certain stage and a certain level in their growth, then those processes tend to become complex. And there's huge volumes of data involved. There's people who collaborate on the file and need to work together on certain numbers and certain aspects. And they usually come to this stage when working on a single Excel file becomes very challenging. Yeah. Because there's the problem of mistakes and errors. It's difficult to verify who changed certain numbers and where or formulas. Yeah. There is an issue of collaborating on a single file at the same time. There is an issue of delay in getting this data because then normally you would have to send the Excel file to other people via email. So this takes time and you don't have this instant access to certain information. So there are some challenges that stem from the fact that when the company is growing, the processes become more mature, but also more complex. And then it's difficult to manage them the same ways that you would do it when the company had 10 employees. And regarding the second aspect that you asked me about, so this trend of in also turning to off-the-shelf solutions, this is also something that I've noticed is more and more common. And I think, one reason is that definitely off-the-shelf solutions have become much more accessible. They have become cheaper because there is various subscription options that you can just subscribe for a month. So it's very easy to just find a software that you think might be helpful, start using it and just use it to help you automate certain tasks within your work, or maybe collaborate with your teammates. It's like there's a wide variety of solutions to choose from. And it's also, it can be very helpful, but then at the same time, the challenges that I quite often see is that when we have, let's say, 100 people within the company, and then each of those 100 people then has 1, 2, 3 tools maybe that they use, which I don't think is, having 3 tools that you use, that you've subscribed to, it's not that unrealistic. No. Like think of how many tools you use.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So then it just becomes a volume when you put it all together. So it creates issues such as access control and then controlling the costs as well. Yeah. And then having so many tools and not always knowing what tools are being used in which department maybe some data or some tools are multiplied and people are using different tools but for similar things. Also, when we have so many tools, this means that data is often scattered between those tools. So there's no single point of information, or there's just no tool that would give you this big picture view of your company processes, company information. So you have a lot of insights, but then quite often those insights are just tiny pieces of puzzle, or maybe, it's one bigger piece that you've created out of 4 puzzles, but then the full picture is like 100 of them. So I think having multiple tools sometimes can be challenging because it doesn't give you the full picture of what's going on within the company.
So regarding that, what you said, I painted a specific picture, right? So this company that had Excel files and then started using different tools. But from your experience, like real life experience, what is more common? Companies that actually start piling up those different tools and jumping around and having this data scattered, or maybe companies that go straight from Excel to actually using or trying to build a custom solution?
I think that I've noticed that the trend has shifted slightly in the last 3 years. So that's, quite a recent time. And I think that 4 years back, I met more often with companies who wanted to transfer either from even offline processes, sometimes so paper-based processes, to digital tools. Then we also have had a lot of clients who wanted to transfer from Excel-based processes towards digital tools and web applications. And in the last 3 years, and I think that has changed a lot during the pandemic as well, when a lot of companies were just sort of forced to start working remotely and start using a lot of tools to help them organize work in the new reality, which often meant working from homes. So I think that in the last 2 years, I've noticed that there is a lot more projects that revolve around integrating various data sources, that revolve around connecting different tools that the companies are already using and that are already in place. Maybe also adapting some of those solutions to have new features that would be a bit more unique towards company processes. So I think that it has shifted a little bit in terms of what we're seeing and what we're noticing.
I see. I understand. Yeah, the pandemic changed a lot for multiple companies. If a company didn't have any processes or tools to work remotely, then for a while it was chaos. And then there was a moment of like calming down. Okay, there are tools, we can use this, we can use that, and then kind of realizing that it's possible to work remotely. But as you mentioned, it also opened the eyes of companies to different tool sets, to different solutions that can be used to organize work. And sometimes I can imagine that it was kind of like finding a box of sweets and kind of like trying to have everything at once, and then trying to use different tools, and at the end ending up with so many subscriptions and so many places where the data was scattered that it was quite difficult to manage. And at that point, I think it's important for the company to kind of realize, okay, should we do the custom solution or not? Should we optimize our processes? And I use this term business process automation at the beginning, and you also kind of like used it a couple of times. So at this point, I wanted to kind of stop and kind of start explaining what do we mean by that? Can you give us an example? Or
so I think that business process automation is a very vast term, and this can cover many different tools, many different approaches. But I would say, looking from our experience and from our perspective as a software house, I would say that what this means for us is that we quite often were in the process of building tools that would help to reduce errors in certain processes, that would allow to automate certain tasks that were in the past manual or largely manual. This means freeing up employees' time so that they don't have to focus on those manual tasks, but then they can just move into more strategic, creative, or any other tasks that just involve other things than manual copying and pasting large amounts of data.
No.
So yes, I would say that there's a lot of business process automation software revolves around making people's works easier, more enjoyable, and just by freeing up their time and potential.
Cool. And any specific areas that come to your mind? I don't know, maybe with HR, payrolls.
Yeah, definitely. So I think that, as this is a broad term, then I would say that applications would vary on industry, but looking into different areas of company processes, we can, of course, create solutions for HR departments to automate or optimize recruitment processes, employee onboarding or employee data management. Then for financial departments, it's creating solutions that would help automate financial tasks or payments, invoicing, budgeting, also document workflow and circulation around the company, approval workflow for certain documents and strategic decisions. Then there's software solutions for organizing data and information and also analyzing data to give you some insights and just maybe cut this road a bit short into drawing insightful conclusions. So I would say that possibly every department of the company can have potential for introducing a business automation tool or business optimization software. It just depends on what is the key need of the company.
Yeah, I think the key need is kind of like the catchphrase here. I had a personal experience of working as a human API in one of the big corporations, international corporations. And the need for me being there as an intern to do manual work just arose because there were two different systems. One was old and one was new, and there was no integration between them. So those systems were used to track, I don't even remember what, because it was kind of like so abstract for me as an intern. And there was a different way of numbering, using numbers to assign to the different, I think it were like cases or something like that. And my job was to take numbers from one system and check what was the equivalent in the other system. And that was everything I had to do. And it was so boring, so mundane. It was so easy to make mistakes because there was like a very long list of numbers. So it was easy to skip something, to confuse something. And I really felt that my job could have been automated, and I only lasted a month in that position because it was just so crushing. So the company has to know whether or not it makes sense to employ, I guess, people to do those kind of things, or maybe it's actually a good time to start investing and think about a different solution, because humans can be used for so much more, for more creative work, for different tasks. It doesn't have to be manual and repetitive.
Yeah, definitely. I think, what you've described is a good example, but of course the situation is quite often very complex, because then maybe the task was short term, and investing in a solution to automate the whole process wouldn't be a good investment in the long run. But I think, in general, yes, so this is a good example of tasks that could be automated, but whether it will be automated or not, whether it's a good investment in the software or not, is just a whole of a different story.
That's true. There are a lot of elements that have to be considered when making this decision about whether or not to invest in the custom solution. And I think we'll get back to that topic as well. Before that, I wanted to kind of stay still with the topic of business process automation and the benefits it can bring. But also, on the other hand, what kind of limitations there can be when it comes to automation. So what's your take on that?
So benefits, I think that we've already mentioned a few, but to organize it, I think that when we introduce software solutions that assist employees in their daily job, then, if we automate certain tasks, if the system automates certain tasks and allow people to focus on more strategic, more creative decisions, or just, it frees up people's time. So there is some productivity benefit to it. There is efficiency boost. We can think of reducing manual tasks and manual efforts, which is also a huge benefit. Then a lot of those, so boosting efficiency, reducing errors, freeing up employees' time, can also bring a lot of positive benefits in the area of costs. Yeah. So when we optimize certain processes, when we streamline workflows, it might turn out that as a result, we will also experience cost reduction or waste reduction, which again can be translated into cost reduction. So there's different benefits that revolve around optimizing the processes that we're targeting with a software solution. And then of course sometimes when introducing software solution, this means that maybe the company can open up new service lines, or maybe they can increase their offering, so have more customers, or offer better quality of their services, which in turn may open doors for scalability of the business itself. So I would say depending on the area that we're building software for, there can be multiple benefits. And of course, figuring out those benefits should be the first step before building the software itself, to know what we would like to expect from the software.
Yeah, what we would like to achieve. And what about the limitations? Something maybe that the software cannot do, or maybe can hinder even?
So of course there are limitations, as with every process. And I would say that what sometimes companies overlook, that creating a dedicated software solution is a complex process. So implementation of the system can be complex, starting even from the very beginning, so before the system is even created, because it's important to spend some time on analyzing the process, maybe optimizing it in the first place before we move into creating software that's targeting this process. So there is a lot of time, and quite often a lot of employee time involved to make sure that what we will build later on will target the right needs, will target the right processes, that it will focus on the right challenges that the company would like to solve. So there is an intense time of analysis that precedes building the software itself. And that is time consuming. And this is also the stage that quite often gets overlooked. So this is one limitation that's definitely worth considering. Then another limitation that I can think of is resistance to change, because quite often, even if certain processes are somewhat uncomfortable or maybe don't produce exactly the results that the management or the employees would expect, but then it's still tried and tested tools. It's ways of working that you're used to. It's tools that you know how to use, that you know how to operate. And change requires effort and requires energy, and it requires learning new ways of working or new tools. So quite often, I think that, people, even if the new tool is working perfectly well, but it's just new, so it requires getting used to. And change can be difficult. So I would say that limitation, maybe not limitation, but just something that's definitely should be considered is change management within the company, and making sure that the end users and the people who will in the end be using the software are part of the process. And then one other limitation maybe that I can think of is sometimes loss of personal touch, because then when automating certain processes, they're done by the software. And then still having this human insight still may be important at times. So when we look at data, for example, you may receive information that there is 10% of success at a certain process or at a certain task. But it may still be risk that's worth taking, but this requires another form of assessment. So maybe not relying solely on the information that we receive and analyzing it further is important. And then when we think of automating certain tasks, like automating emails that we send, that's perfect. But again, they lack this human touch. So it's a little bit different when you receive email that comes from me and you see my signature and, I just speak to you like I would normally do at work. Yeah. And it's a little bit different if you got an automated response from a machine. So, and of course we can mimic a lot of the natural language nowadays. But again, I think that at some cases and for some businesses, it's definitely worth considering.
I see. I think you mentioned some pretty important limitations, especially at the beginning of the process. So with like the optimization of the processes themselves, involving end user, being aware what's the purpose of building this custom solution, and so on. That's very important at the beginning. And then, of course, there's an element of building the software and this beautiful day when the software is being launched, this platform, this solution. But I also think about the kind of like obstacles in implementing in the company the tool? Do you have any examples? Could you kind of like describe what happens? What can happen? What can go wrong once this software is being launched? Is it the end of the road, or there has to still be some work done on the side of the company?
I think it's just the beginning. Yeah, I mean, launching a software solution is the very first step of the process, but then people actually need to start using the software for it to have the benefits and the value that we mentioned earlier in our conversation. And the process of end users or employees actually starting using the software begins a lot earlier. So when the software is being created, or even when it's just being designed or analyzed, whether we need the software or not. Yeah. So I would say that involving end users, involving employees who will be using the software is crucial to make sure that the system will actually be implemented and used for the purposes that it was created for. Yeah. And then involving users early in the process also creates this possibility to ensure that the features that we're designing, the modules that we're designing are actually the right ones. Yeah. Because sometimes, and I've seen this also in my experience quite a lot, that depending on whether we're talking to end users or whether we're talking to management or people who take strategic decisions, their perspectives differ. And both are valid most times. But then it also differs how both those groups would be using the software or what features they consider to be priority, or maybe how they would just organize the process, even to very little details like naming, which again, in turn, if you have the wrong naming in certain parts of the system, then end users may not, when you release the software, they may not know how to use it because it will not be familiar.
Of course.
So this also goes back to what I mentioned around the process being time consuming sometimes at the beginning, because we really need to stir up those conversations internally within the company, organize the process first, because if you want to make sure that end users will be using it after you launch it, then you need to involve them in the first place.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like the process of making a software solution for a startup, because there are end users. But in case of startups, those are external clients most often, right? It's B2B or B2C. And in case of enterprises, whether we are talking about company with 100 people or an enterprise with 1,000 or more, those end users are internal, right? Those are the employees that will be encouraged to use the software. And still, in both cases, it's very important to take into consideration what they need, what they want, how they behave, what's like kind of what are the needs that have to be answered and covered. So there, for me, there are a lot of similarities in those processes.
Yes, I think there are a lot of similarities, because at the end of the day, both groups are users. So whether it's internally within the company or whether you work in a startup and just want to create a tool that everybody will love, whether this will be true or not, then it just heavily depends on how well you targeted your users' needs. And they can be both internal and external. But I think there's a lot of similarities.
That's quite interesting. But before the company decides to invest in the software, right? Because we are talking about custom solutions, we are talking about business process automation done tailored to the needs of this end users. So before they decide to do this, I guess there are important questions to be answered, like to be or not to be, to do this investment or not, because it can be quite costly at the beginning compared to those off-the-shelf ready solutions. So what kind of advice would you give? What do you think companies should take into consideration when making this kind of decision?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, definitely creating dedicated software solution can be costly, especially when you look at the initial cost, because looking in the long run, the situation might be a little bit different. But initial cost can get high also when you consider the preparation and the analysis period where you also have to involve different people from the company. But then I think that it's best to look at this investment as an investment. So looking in a longer term perspective and a longer time perspective, because then it might be a costly investment, but then again, the payments are usually also spread within a few months. But then looking for looking at a long-term strategic plans for the company may provide an answer whether this investment will bring a lot of benefits that will allow the company to grow and maybe open new service lines, maybe offer better quality services, maybe grow in other way. So I would say that overall and complex business analysis that focuses on the strategic goals of the company in the long run as well. So in a 2, 3, or 5 years perspective is definitely something that's worth considering. So this would be one thing. Then another is competitive advantage. And I've mentioned it a little bit in the first part, but then again, creating dedicated software solution for our company processes may turn out to bring something that's very unique for the company that nobody else has, none other competitor has. So this may also be an advantage, short term or long term, depending on the strategic goals, but that's definitely worth considering whether building a software solution or dedicated software will give our company something extra, something unique that will differentiate us from others. And then I think another thing is also scalability of the business. That's also an aspect when considering building dedicated software solution, because if we anticipate that our company will be growing either slowly or maybe a bit more rapidly, but then looking at the perspective of where we want to be with our company in, say, 3-5 years' time, and can off-the-shelf solutions accommodate those goals when we grow in number of employees, when we grow in number of service lines of offering. Scalability is also an important aspect, and with off-the-shelf solutions, it's sometimes difficult to achieve the same results with a dedicated solution, which then can still be developed and grown and scaled.
And can be adjusted. I think it's a very important notion what you made. The point here is that custom software development is a long-term investment.
It is.
So it has to be considered in terms of a couple of years, 3-5 years ahead, 10, thinking about the future, because the payments are spread. Making software can take a couple of months, it can take a couple of years, and it can be never-ending process of improvement and evolving. So the investment actually has to be considered in the scale of a couple of years in the long term.
Yeah, but it's interesting what you mentioned around the never-ending process of improvements, because it may sound a bit negative, but I look at it from this perspective that so is the company. I mean, like, it's a never-ending process of growing and changing and improving. And, sometimes you have better days, others you have worse times. But, companies, when you think of them, they are constantly changing. And this change also entails changes in the software, because when the company is growing, then the processes change, and you do need to adjust the system to accommodate this change. But I would say that this is a natural process and is just part of the life cycle for a company. And this would be exactly the same when you look at the off-the-shelf solutions, because then when your company is growing, when your company is changing, you could come to this point wherein you think that, okay, we're using those off-the-shelf solutions, but they are no longer sufficient because we have too many employees. Maybe it has become too expensive because, $25 for a subscription may not be a lot when you have 10 people. But then if you have 100 of them,
1,000
or 1,000 of them, then it already becomes a significant cost. So I think that this need for change and adjustment is something that's very natural. And then whatever software solution companies decide on, it should allow to accommodate this change.
The change is kind of constant in our lives. I have no idea who said this quote, whether I'm quoting this correctly or not, but there was something along those lines. So let me play a little bit of a devil's advocate at the end, because we are discussing cases where companies decide to to invest in a custom solution. And what about case when company wants to invest, but they actually don't need it? They kind of like push for the custom solution because everyone else is doing it, or they kind of have maybe unrealistic unrealistic expectations. Do you have any examples from your experience of companies that actually pushed to have custom solution it wasn't needed, or maybe you can kind of like think of how it may turn out?
Yes, definitely. I think, it happens quite often that I would say that there are two possibilities that come to mind in this aspect. So the first one is when companies decide to create a dedicated software solution, but then something goes wrong in this analysis process, and maybe the needs are not well defined, or maybe we, together with the client, we didn't manage to pinpoint the right challenges that the company would like to solve. Sometimes the end users, we also spoke about this for a little while, sometimes in the process, the companies may fail to involve the end users enough to make sure that the analysis that we're doing is thorough and that we're targeting the right goals or the right aspects. So when this happens, then I would say that the moment when the software is released, it's very instant, and we can see a lot of resistance towards the tool. We can see that people are not using it, or when they come to us with feedback, we would see a lot of points that weren't even considered at the analysis stage. So there might be things that maybe were prioritized for a later stage, but there might be feedback issues that revolve around things that we haven't discussed at all, or just are completely brand new, but could be relevant. So I would say that this happens, of course, and this is one scenario. Another scenario that I also witnessed and experienced is when companies aim to build a solution that's very big and very complex right from the start. So this means that we could spend a lot of time analyzing the business, the processes, and this is also a time-consuming process. Then it already turns out to be a very complex tool, then is in development for 12 months. And as we said, change is a natural process for a lot of companies. So in those 12 months, a lot can change. Processes change, people change. Maybe even your company will do a pivot, like you mentioned startups, right? So they pivot quite a lot.
Of course, yeah.
But the thing is that, and we also spoke a little bit about change management and resistance to change. So after those 12 months, when the company then decides to release a system to users, that's huge. So you don't have to accommodate one change to one process. You would, as an employee, you would need to accommodate a change to 5 or 6 processes that you're working on a daily basis. So it can feel overwhelming. It's very complex. You're overloaded with information. So I would say that this is detrimental to introducing the software and onboarding users. So an alternative to this would be to create in smaller iterations. So just focus on one process at a time. Create just a simpler solution to address this one process, release it early, consult it with the users early, rely on their feedback, and then iterate and add new features based on the feedback that you receive, and just adapt to the processes that are changing in time when you're developing. But this way, the companies would be able to follow their company's growth and just follow in those footsteps very closely, but then as well not overloading the employees with a lot of functionalities and a lot of features at once.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that this process, it doesn't have to happen at the same time, and it probably shouldn't, because it's just a lot to take on for any kind of company. It again sounds a little bit like the process in case of startups, so iteration, step by step.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult and it's challenging, because then quite often when you think of a certain process, you think of it as a whole.
Yeah.
And of course you can see various aspects of the process, but then it just feels that, okay, it has to function all at the same time. So it is challenging to pick those little pieces that could be separated and handled individually. But in my experience, this is definitely a lot more efficient process in the long run. And sometimes, in the times when you're analyzing the full process, the whole complex process, you could already have developed simple solutions for like 2 of them and put it in use and see how it's going, and then build on top of that. So this is also a time efficient approach.
Yeah, and it sounds much more manageable than just like looking at this big challenge as one chunk of job that has to be done.
Yeah.
It should be probably just divided into smaller pieces, more manageable.
Yeah. Also, it's more cost efficient then because you're not spending a lot of money on this big project. You can just gradually build smaller parts of the system, see if it works. So it's also less risk, I think, from company's perspective.
Sounds like a very, very good advice. Let me just finish at this point. I think we touched a very important topic of business process automation today. And more broadly, it was all about optimization as well in case of companies. My closing question, something that I like asking all of my guests, is connected to our visual aspect of the company, Inwedo. So, of course, we have this space theme, we have astronaut. So my favorite question is about favorite sci-fi movie, series, or books. Do you have anything specific that you can recommend?
You know, questions about my favorite things are usually difficult for me. It's difficult for me to choose, but I'm going to go with Back to the Future. You know, I'm a 90s kid. I love traveling. And, you know, we had a screening of the film here in Inwedo a few years back.
So like 2015 when the date...
yes, there was this magical date happening, so we did that.
That's great. That's great. That's a classic. I think when you mentioned you're a 90s kid, I'm also a 90s kid. It's like the view of the future kind of changed because sci-fi movies used to show a very positive, perspective of the future, like very tech advanced and society is being happy. And then modern movies about the future, sci-fi movies, they kind of show this post-apocalyptic version more often, which I think says a lot about our, morale and our approach and our hopes, lack of hopes for the future. So, yeah.
We'll have to wait and see.
We'll have to wait and see. And in the meantime, we can just watch the old classics to kind of cheer us up.
Yes, definitely.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for our today's episode. And yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.